Michelle Lucas, and she's going to talk to us today about Space Inspires.
I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a few minutes, but I wanted to talk about space in general first. We've heard some amazing statistics about aerospace in Kentucky. We've heard about great ideas, the moonshot idea. I love that. I love that. Love that. I know nobody in this room remembers this because nobody in this room is old enough, and we're sticking with that story. But there are a lot of folks who can very vividly remember when Alan Shepard launched on May 5th, 1961 into space. And as a result of the challenges that were going on with the fear of Sputnik, the Cold War, the space race, the Eisenhower Education Defense Act was started. And so space back in the 60s inspired reform in education. It became something that helped build our scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians that are still, many of whom are still working today. Moving along, the moon landing. I'm not going to ask anyone to raise their hands because I'm not going to try and alienate folks because it never ends well, but this was a very poignant memory for a lot of folks. My grandfather can tell you exactly where he was sitting, exactly what he was wearing, what he was doing. My grandfather was not an educated man, but he was amazed by this wondrous event. Do you know that on Apollo 11, the average age of a mission controller was 28? We're not talking folks who'd been studying and had their PhD and had been working in industry for 20 years. We're talking young kids. Space inspired these young adults to go and be engineers, be technical backgrounds. Getting to something that maybe perhaps more folks might recognize, the space shuttle. John Young and Bob Crippen, STS-1, 1981. Now this I can tell you I do remember. And in fact, this single event is what brings me here today, here to Moorhead, Kentucky. I come from an area that is not that dissimilar to Moorhead, Kentucky. I'm from an area outside of the Chicagoland region that is a steel mill town. And quite frankly, we didn't talk about stuff like outer space and going to college or becoming an engineer. In fact, today my high school's percentage of students who go on to education post-high school, I'm sorry, not my high school, my county, it's still only 17%. This event, I don't know how in the world my grandmother, and not the grandmother who would be married to my grandfather I previously talked about, but my grandmother says to me, I'm outside playing, it's April, we had a nice day, it wasn't snowing or crazy cold. Honey, you need to come inside and watch something. And I remember thinking, Grandma's lost it. She's telling me to come inside and watch television. Now, for all of you who are still in school, the concept of having one television that had 5 stations, I know is incomprehensible, but that was the case. And so we really didn't watch TV. And so I kind of ignored Grandma, which probably a bad plan, but my friend Erin and I were outside playing and life was good. And I hear again, Michelle, get in here, you need to watch this. And I continue to ignore her because I'm certain that Grandma has lost it, right? Well, then I got the Michelle Lynn Lucas. Well, okay, I could have gotten an Olympic medal for as fast as I sprinted inside after I got all 3 names. My grandmother had heard that this thing called the space shuttle was going to launch. She didn't really know what it meant. She didn't really know what it was all about. She remembered watching the moon landing. She remembered watching Alan Shepard launch into space. And she thought, maybe my granddaughter needs to see this. Little did she know that this would become a launching point for literally the rest of my life. There I am, that dorky little kid. I put this in here for all the students who think, oh, Michelle's whatever. No, I was just an average girl, just like everybody else. I was fortunate that I got to go to space camp. And you know how I got to go to space camp? I applied. Here's a secret. You can't get it if you don't apply. I couldn't afford it. There was no way. When the movie Space Camp came out, I looked at my mom and I'm like, I have to go to space camp. My mom's like, oh, honey, that's sweet. But I'm pretty sure it's more than $5. So I'm pretty sure that's just not gonna happen. So I wrote to space camp. Pen, paper, actual stamp on an envelope, crazy concept. And I said to them something along the lines of, space camp sounds amazing. I watched the movie. I would love to come to space camp. I know I can't afford it, but please, 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 would you just send me the brochure? Because it looks so cool. And so they not only sent me the brochure, they sent me a scholarship application. And I filled out the scholarship application on a typewriter, which was quite interesting, and sent it off, never expecting to actually get a scholarship. I'm from this little town where nobody leaves, nobody talks about space, nobody does stuff like that. It changed my life. It literally changed my life to be in an area where everybody else was a space dork like me. And for the record, I wear that as a badge of honor. I'm happy to be called a space geek. I'm happy to be called a space dork. I will refer to myself as such. Not saying anybody else has to, but I am very happy to wear that badge of honor. So I did get to go to space camp more than once on more than one scholarship. Okay, so I went once, they had another program, and I'm like, well, let me try another scholarship application. I tell you all of this because it comes into play for later. Continuing on, I graduated. I leave this up here because I know this is like one of the strangest looking mascots you've probably ever seen. His name's Johan. He's a brickie. Yeah, okay, I heard it exactly. What's a brickie? That's what everybody asks. Hobart was built on old brickyards. And in the steel milling industry and the milling industry in general, so Johan is a bricklayer. So we were the brickies. This was not a fancy school. This was not Craft Academy. It was not Gatton Academy. It was your average high school in a not so extravagant area, shall we say. Went to school, I went to Purdue University, I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, studied aerospace engineering, communications, space studies. Had the wonderful opportunity to fly on the Vomit Comet. For the record, for all you boys who are wondering, I did not vomit. I had a team of 3 guys, and one of them did. I won't say who, but one of them did. I was a counselor at space camp, and all these roads led me to my goal of going to work, not going on a space shuttle yet, holding out hope, not the space shuttle, but in space. All these roads led me to NASA. That was all I had wanted to do from the time I was 3, was go work at NASA. Space inspired me. I didn't know what an engineer was. An engineer drives trains, right? Actually, that's what my brother used to tell everybody. My sister wants to drive trains. She wants to be an engineer. And when people would ask me, well, why do you want to be an engineer? I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't know what an engineer did. All I knew was that what I read was that to be an astronaut or to work at NASA, you needed to study engineering. And the place that had graduated more astronauts than any military academy was Purdue University. Oh, great, that's only an hour and 45 minutes away. Fill out that application. But I had no idea what it really meant to be an engineer. I just knew that space was my ultimate goal. It inspired me. It inspired me to try harder in my calculus class. That was brutal. Mr. Brumley was about as, he was about as tough of a calculus teacher as I possibly could have had, and at the time, I despised him. I'd come home and be doing my calculus homework and be like, what's the point of this? What am I ever gonna use this for? Why is this relevant? But it prepared me, and space was what kept me inspired enough to keep pushing through. I was fortunate enough to work with the International Space Station program. I worked in mission control for a handful of missions. I was an International Space Station operations planner. I was responsible for the systems engineering and putting together of plans for the crew. Let me put that in layman's terms. I got to tell the crew what to do with their 24 hours on board the space station. They don't just get to go up there and do whatever they want, and contrary to the videos that you see, they do stuff other than stupid astronaut tricks. Though every astronaut video has them in there, let's face it. We would all do the same thing if we were in microgravity too. So I got to work in flight control. I absolutely loved it. It was amazing. I thought I would never leave that until, maybe I went into space. And my boss said to me, hey, I've got an opportunity for you. We think you should go be an instructor for the Daily Operations Group. I'm like, what? It's like, oh, you train astronauts. And I did something that's unwise. And for all of the young folks in here, I don't know, maybe I should just say for everybody in here, because maybe there's some adults that need this advice too. Don't laugh at your boss. Never good. Luckily, he was my friend, and when I laughed at him and said, have you met me? I can't teach my dog to sit. I can't teach an astronaut. Long story short, I took a leap of faith, so to speak, and became an instructor. And I was a flight controller for a little over 2 years. I was an instructor for over 7 years. And here I am with Expedition 14, Sunny Williams, who is now one of the commercial crew. She is one of the 4 astronauts who might fly on the next commercial vehicle. Misha Turin and Michael Lopez Alegria, who was the former head of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. I had the opportunity to work on the NEMO underwater missions, work with all of our international partners. I got to do a lot of cool stuff. But it really boils down to 2 words. Space inspires. I never would have thought about wanting to do any of these things had I not watched the STS-1 launch and been inspired by space and been inspired by the amazing opportunities that exist. You live in a state that is embracing space. The opportunities are immense. You have to take them. I'm not just talking to the students, I'm talking to the adults too. There are possibilities and opportunities here that are, sorry, pardon the pun, and Bob's not here for me to give him grief, literally out of this world. Bob from Rajat earlier was saying he would have all the best puns. I'm like, I don't know, I can get kind of corny sometimes. So, how many of you think space is inspirational? A little bit. Okay, good. Yay. All right, good. Good audience. Making sure I, haven't lost everybody after lunch. So tell me, how many of you watched space shuttle launches on television? All right. Pretty awesome. Anybody see any in person? Okay. I won't ask for a show of hands because I know some of you might be embarrassed to admit this, but I will tell you, I cried at every space shuttle launch I ever saw. And it wasn't just the people involved on that rocket. It was the hard work, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the love, and the passion that went into it. Every person that worked on this, whether it was the crew trainers, whether it was the person who made the widget that went in the flight control system, whether it was the person who glued the tile on, they did that job out of love because space inspired them. Obviously, you all know the space shuttle is not flying anymore, which is a sad thing, and we won't get into that political debate because I only have 30 minutes, and I could talk about that for probably more than 30. But it's the dawn of a new era. We are launching from US soil. We're not launching people yet, but we are launching things such as cargo and satellites. The top left is a launch that just happened a couple of weeks ago, the orbital ATK OA6 launch on a ULA rocket. Talk about commercial. You've got a commercial payload, the Cygnus, on top of a commercial rocket, the Atlas V. Blue Origin's the one over to the right in the middle. How many of you use Amazon? More than a couple. Jeff Bezos is responsible for Blue Origin. He sometimes jokes that he's trying to take his bajillion-dollar, worth and make a multi-million-dollar industry out of it, or something like that. That's one of the jokes. Is what's the quickest way to make a small fortune out of a rocket launch? It's to start with a large one, because there's a lot of R&D that goes with that. Bottom right is SpaceX, who is supposed to be launching on April 8th. Now, orbital ATK and SpaceX, they are tied into this state, whether you realize it or not. They are both folks who can and will launch items for Space Tango. Tango Lab 1 is supposed to launch on a SpaceX rocket. I've talked to Twyman about launching experiments on orbital ATK's rockets. So they are involved here, even if they don't have a physical presence in Kentucky, they are directly contributing to the Kentucky aerospace economy. Some of the vehicles, they're kind of cool looking. I'm, of course, partial to Dream Chaser in the top right corner with her wings. But Cygnus was named the cutest spacecraft by Buzzwire magazine. I'm not sure how the Cygnus engineers feel about being called cute, but hey, we can't all have the cutest spacecraft. How many of you had heard of any of these companies before I mentioned it? Okay. How many of you had heard of all of these companies before I mentioned it? Okay, quite a few. So, speaking of knowing folks, who's that? Jennifer Lawrence. What does Jennifer Lawrence have to do with any of you? She's from Kentucky. She's from Louisville. All right, so good to know. A lot of you know Jennifer Lawrence. Did you know she's tied into space? She is going to be the voice of the latest IMAX movie about space. I know more than a few astronauts who are excited to watch it just because they want to hear Jennifer Lawrence. Who's that? Okay, I heard one person, so don't say it louder yet. Anybody else know who that is? Does this help? Who is it? Terry Walcott. So, we all know Jennifer Lawrence, who's from Louisville, Kentucky, because she's an actress. Do you know he's from Louisville? In fact, and I wrote this down because I certainly didn't want to mess this up, he went to Louisville Southern High School, and then he went on and got his bachelor's degree in math from Western Kentucky. Here in Kentucky, he was inspired by space, even if the aerospace industry wasn't what it is today. So can you imagine how many astronauts are sitting in classrooms right now? Or maybe not because it's spring break, but you know what I'm saying. Something that I think needs to happen is a shift in the paradigm. I want everybody to know who this is, just as much as they know who Jennifer Lawrence is. Taking nothing away from Jennifer Lawrence. I think she's lovely, she does wonderful movies. These folks, they're changing the world, all right? So Terry Walcott, we'll work on trying to get him to this area at some point. How many of you have heard this before? Think outside the box. All right, everyone? Well, here's the beauty of working with students when you start talking about space. Students don't even know there's a box. They don't have to think outside of it because they haven't had that box placed around them yet. I'm not gonna lie, there are times where students come up with ideas, and I've looked at scientists who are way smarter than I am. I do not have a PhD. I do not have science degrees. And I've looked at scientists with PhDs and gone, do you have any idea what they're talking about? And I've had some go, because we're too constrained by the box. So let me talk about something Chris Kimball talked about before. What if the next big breakthrough in medicine isn't on Earth? Let me put that in a similar context. What if the next big breakthrough regarding medicine or space doesn't come from a PhD? What if it comes from one of you who isn't constrained by thinking inside that box? What if one of you who has yet to be, I don't want to say shackled with, here's how you're supposed to think, because school is a great thing, but what if while you still have all these crazy ideas that sound crazy, what if your crazy idea is exactly what answers questions like this? Again, forget thinking outside the box. Throw the box away. Or there isn't a box. So how do we make all this happen? Heard great talks today from folks about making sure Kentucky has a strong workforce, how important aerospace is. So I'm going to challenge every one of you. Every one of you has a job in this. Every one of you has a part in this. Talk about it. How many of you have something going on that you are part of aerospace in any way? Raise your hand. All right. So I challenge every one of you, as Elisa said, talk about it at the dinner table. But more than that, tell your neighbors. Tell your beautician. Tell your nail person. Tell your barber. Talk about it. Most people don't realize how amazing the Kentucky aerospace industry is. Guess what? If you're making that widget that holds something together on the SpaceX Dragon, that's part of the aerospace industry. Just because you're not actually launching into space or you didn't design the experiment of science doesn't mean you're not part of the aerospace industry. You are part of it down to the very last widget. You can't go into space as one person. Every astronaut will tell you that. They will tell you that it takes a whole team. It makes the idea of it takes the community a whole different level. Space inspires. Space is going to inspire the next generation to take the Kentucky aerospace industry from an $8 billion industry to a $18 billion industry or an $80 billion industry. And so, since I challenged you to go talk about it, I'm going to make your life a little bit easier and give you another way to help fulfill this challenge. And there's a little shameless self-promotion here, I can't help it. So Ellie mentioned I run Higher Orbits. A couple of years ago, I had started doing some educational outreach, something that, once again, I never thought I would do, kind of like I never thought I'd be an instructor, and realized that I loved working with students. I loved being able to share my story. I loved being able to share the story of anything space-related, because there's nothing that is more inspirational than space. And there are three things that students are always interested in: space, dinosaurs, and rock and roll. I don't know anything about dinosaurs, and you do not want to hear me try and play an instrument. My mom wouldn't even let me play the pots and pans, okay? So I stuck with what I know, space. And Higher Orbit's whole mission is to use space as a conduit to talk about science, technology, engineering, math, leadership, communications, and team building. I'm not trying to say everybody needs to be a rocket scientist, but if you can't get inspired by space, I probably can't help you. Higher Orbits runs a program called Go for Launch. Go for Launch is unique in that it's a 3-day event held across the country. It is a space-inspired camp. Notice I do not put the words space and that 4-letter word that starts with a C and a P next to each other because that is trademarked. So it's a space-inspired camp where we bring in an astronaut to work with the students. Not a 40-minute talk, 12 questions and out the door, which is still pretty awesome. The astronaut's there the whole time so students can talk to them, use their mentorship. Each team will have to define and design an experiment they would like to see tested in space. A winner will be selected from each event location. They will be competed divisionally, and the winning experiment from each division will launch to space through Space Tango. So while I am not from Kentucky, I'm very proud to work so closely with so many amazing Kentuckians. Am I saying that right? You guys refer yourselves as Kentuckians? Okay. And this is one of the ways. So, it just so happens that there is a Go for Launch in Louisville at the Kentucky Science Center, August 1st to the 3rd, and one at BCTC Leestown Campus, Lexington, August 5th through the 7th for high school students. So, for the adults, here's the challenge of talking about aerospace. Tell somebody about this. You want to get a kid inspired? Stick them in front of an astronaut and let them talk. That is pretty motivating. For all the students who are here, if you'd like to attend, if you go to the website, higherorbits.org, send an email. The email is going to go to me. The only other employee of Higher Orbits has 4 legs and fur. His name is Guinness, and he's great at morale, but the paws, they are pretty lousy for typing. So you're going to get a response from me. And I will offer you an incredible sign-up deal if you email me within the next week or so. So if you'd like to attend either event. But I'm going to challenge all of you. Let's make sure there's an experiment launched specifically from a Kentucky event. To do that, we need some sponsorship, we need some sign-ups, and perhaps Western Kentucky doesn't have a Go for Launch yet. Let's make Kentucky the flagship for this. Let's make Kentucky proud to be inspiring their next generation using space. I don't know about you guys, but you have all inspired me today. This is really amazing to hear what your state is willing to invest in the future. And that's what an investment in space is. It's an investment in the future. In the 60s, with progress that we were making in space, it was directly attributable to 3 times the number of PhDs than we'd ever had before. They attribute that directly to the space race and the push for the moon landing. Let's push to make education better by using space. Let's use space to inspire. If you want to get in touch with me, here's where you can hunt me down. I'm definitely on Twitter, and if you saw me in the back typing away, that's I was tweeting. I swore I would never do it, and then I got sucked in a couple years ago, and now it's the best form of free marketing that there possibly could be. I welcome questions. I welcome anyone stopping by the Space Tango booth. I've got some postcards out there. Grab that, drop me an email. Thank you for having me, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, all of you, for your passion about space.